Ever since the big lore update, it felt like Legends of Runeterra got a fresh breeze of excitement. Because now, even all the players who don't play the game because maybe card games are not really their thing, still enjoy digging into all the new cards because the story they reveal became a lot more relevant. And yet again, this week we got more teasers pouring in. So the excitement started rising too. Be it through the Chemtech Drake joining the canon universe, or possible teasers that Mordekaiser might get a new canonical bit too. And oh boy, if that one's real, you know I'm gonna be very excited. But outside of all of this, Riot also revealed a project they've been working on in the background the entire time, which warmed up the hearts of many players. And of course I'm talking about the project Riot calls A Death for a Day. And specifically I am talking about the story of Rusticus. Rusticus is a player who has hovered around Legends of Runeterra for a while now. Not just as a Runeterra enjoyer, but as a serious ladder climber. He first stumbled upon this game in spring 2021. And it was the first time he had ever played a collectible card game, with the gateway leading into it being his interest in League's universe. 2 years later, and he had fallen in love with the game and the community. And it became a very important support that would help him with dealing with his disease. In fact, it was especially important when it came to engaging his mind, while his body started losing functionality. Legends of Runeterra may have served as a bit of a distraction in this way, but in reality it was a key factor in a ruthless battle. To give you some context, the post also talks about the details. Rusticus has ALS, which is a rare terminal illness which slowly deteriorates the muscles, and eventually it would leave you paralyzed. This has no cure and there is not even a treatment for it, with the prognosis being 2 to 5 years. It usually affects people of older ages, but in rare cases it also affects younger people, with Rusticus receiving his diagnosis at 28. And now, 5 years later, as he puts it himself, he is bedridden with a feeding tube and ventilators. Now, to hop outside of the article for a moment. This story struck quite close to me because my aunt used to have an ALS too, so I witnessed this exact scenario myself. So many times, while it may seem like I'm just reading the article, I may as well just be talking from personal experience. Which is why I can tell you right now that Rusticus is a bloody hero. He then continues that he progressed through various stages of ALS, and so he had to adapt to keep gaming. At one point, his friends built him a cabinet so he could play Xbox games. But then, when his fingers gave up, they altered it with foot pedals. And now, his entire rig is based on eye tracking, which of course is something Legends of Runeterra can fully support. And if anything, it really shows how this game can be played by anyone. Which is where the post talks about something magical. You see, as a death for a day, Rusticus got to make his own follower, which is quite a task to do, which is why this journey starts with showing us how the journey started. It all began with the Runeterra team reaching out to him. They told him that they followed his entire story and that they wanted to collab on a piece of content. Of course, this would be quite the awesome news to pretty much anyone. But in Rusticus's case, this could be used to raise awareness about ALS. And so, some back and forth talking had started, where the Runeterra team was open to absolutely anything from a personalized card back to an emote. But ultimately they landed on the big prize, his very own custom card. This way, not only would they be able to express it in many different ways, but as a fellow Runeterra enjoyer, I can tell you, it is awesome that he's gonna be part of the canon universe. And so, with the plan laid out, they jumped straight into the DNA team phase. Which, from League we know that the DNA stands for Design, Narrative and Art. So they started with step 1. The brainstorming, which had pretty much no bounds. Literally anything could be used for the card. From his favorite region and the archetype, to Rusticus's own story and his experience with the ALS. And so, a few ideas sprouted. One was a 3-cost 3/3 Targonian card, where at the start of the round it would grant him -1/-1 and grant all his allies in his hand +1/+1. It should be obvious that this card was themed around how ALS behaves. But unfortunately, this wouldn't be the happiest card to have around, since the end would be pretty much inevitable for this card. So instead, there was also another one, a 6-cost 4/4 Piltover card, which would predict and then deal damage based on the cost of the prediction. This idea was themed around a tweet which said that he was destroying other players with his eyes. I'll be honest, this would have been an amazing thematic, since the power would really come from his sight. But even this would not be the perfect one. Over time, about a dozen different cards had sprouted. From these, it was all pruned down to about 4 or 5 cards, which is where they could go into playtesting. And apparently, this phase was a blast. They played together for hours and they gave each art about 1 or 2 games to try them all out. And of course, at that point, all the cards had their silly placeholder arts and names. And to really test the card, the team had some cheats which would give you the card anytime you needed it. But eventually, after all the testing, it all narrowed down into a single card. And apparently, while all of them were awesome, the choice was ultimately easy. It would all go down to a card codenamed Papa and the Kiddos. At first sight, it should be easy to see just how much this one reflects Rusticus' story. Although, the story is not just his own. It reflects his entire family. Because without them, he wouldn't be where he is now. And so thematically, it made sense for him to put this card into Ionia. But here, the decision was between the Navori and the Vastaya. The Navori were war-torn survivors of the Noxian invasion. In a way, their suffering and their recovery mimicked his battle with ALS, including how the strength came from staying together. But on the other side, we also have the Vastaya with their tribal families, with all of their lifestyles being based on magic. And in many ways, these felt way more in line with him and his family bonding together. Which is why this is the design that was pushed forward. Also, apparently there was a third design that was themed around a Karma follower, but apparently Rusticus and Karma don't really get along. Anyway, here is where the art started coming to life. Obviously, on the visual side, it is all about his story dealing with the ALS, from the beginning to the end. As he puts it, it is a little bit somber, but he still wanted it to be real. There is no cure, the finality is written in stone. But despite that, he wanted to show that life persists, and the impact it has goes beyond the expiration date. But also, the team wanted to highlight the disability, which becomes obvious when you witness the amazing wheelchair. But also, his 3 kids would be turned into a separate card that would continue the story. And so, after settling down on this, before going into the final art, the team had some ideas for what it could look like. The first idea would start with Papa moving across Ionia in his wheelchair, documenting the sunset, with the second card being the kids, who would explore his wheelchair without Papa at that point, as they held his journal and pointed at something in the distance. The second idea was to have Papa play with his children, or perhaps doing some bonding activity such as fishing, with the second card then showing the daughter growing up and then teaching everyone else how to do that activity. The third idea was to have Papa staring at a tree, completely at peace at that point, with the second card being his daughter climbing the same tree. And once you would put these two together, they would reveal a bigger piece of art. Ultimately, the final art included all of these. And so, here's the final art for Papa. And here is the final art for the kiddos. As you can see, they are holding Papa's journal as they continue exploring the world the way he had taught them. The post mentions that the first thing to notice here would be the changing seasons, which really indicates that some time had passed, with the second element being the journal we just mentioned. It was passed down to his kids as a way to preserve Papa's legacy, but also it is awesome to see his kids playing with it, which Rusticus confirms is exactly the sentiment he hopes to pass down to his kids. After which, it all came down to the final touches, which would be the balancing and the names. He was fortunate to watch his own daughter grow up, and in a way he saw her progress in the opposite direction from him. As she started walking, he moved into a wheelchair. And as she started talking, he lost his voice. And as this kept going, in a way, Rusticus felt like he was giving his abilities to his daughter instead of just losing them. Which is where the power of this card comes from. As we mentioned, it is all about the family support. So it simply made sense for these cards to be themed around support. And finally, the final decision was the names. Papa and Kiddos is nice, but it doesn't really fit Runeterra. The idea was to sneak in his nickname Rusty, but Rust doesn't exactly fit Ionia since they don't really use metals. So they had to be tricky about it. Which is where they were able to put in Ednair, which was a shout out to his former programming friends from his past employer. His real name was Andrew, which got obfuscated in the database as Ednair, so they started calling him that. And for the kiddos, he wanted to include all of them there, so they would be all equal. And it turns out the perfect name for that would be Aviarists. The name fits thematically, narratively, and it includes all of the kids' names. Avi, Arya, and August. Aviarist. And so, here is how it all fell in place. And Rusticus couldn't be happier about it. It was all a perfect showcase of mutual love of a parent bonding with his family. And honestly, this is all just so great. Massive shout out to Riot for doing all of this. And a massive shout out to Rusty for keeping on with the fight. As I mentioned, I witnessed all of this myself, so I know exactly how hard it can get. And if anything, all of this serves as an everlasting beacon of hope, which I can guarantee you will raise some awareness for ALS. You know, normally I would end these videos with a joke, but nothing I've shown you today is something to joke about. It is all reality which people have the ability to turn into something awesome. So real, in fact, that Riot is currently holding an event in-game, where if you log in, you'll get Ednair for free, and for every one of Ednair's quests completed, Riot will donate to ALS research. But Rusty, I hope you know you are canon now.